Hello friends, welcome back to EduVec. So today we will be covering two important topics of physics. First one is sources of energy and another one is our environment. So this will be the last part of physics basic concept series which is for class 10, and after this we will move to mathematics before moving to advanced topics for JEE. So let us start. So before starting sources of energy, let us understand what is law of conservation of energy, which says energy can neither be created nor be destroyed, but it can transform from one form to another. It means you cannot create energy, you cannot destroy energy, but you can change energy from one form into another. And this is the property why conservation of energy, or why we are talking about energy so much, that okay, we should save energy, we should not waste energy, use of energy should be judicious. All these concepts are coming because of this property, that energy can transform from one form to another. Means the usable energy that we have, that is very limited, and this usable energy immediately gets converted to non-usable or unusable. Usable form of energy gets dissipated or wasted to surroundings in less usable forms. For example, heat losses in electrical transmission. We have already seen in electricity chapter that heat loss in a transmission wire or across any resistor is given by I square RT, where R is the resistance. So that heat is nothing but dissipation. It is also used in some of the appliances like toasters, electric heaters, but it is not desirable always. For example, during transmission of power from one town to another town. Second example is cup of tea getting cold. So if you leave a cup of tea in environment without disturbing it, after some time you will find that tea has become cold. So cup of tea has lost a significant amount of heat energy to the surroundings. Maybe you could have used this heat energy for some other purpose. Maybe you could have used this energy, transform this heat energy to extract some energy out of it, but unfortunately this energy simply gets dissipated into the surroundings. Another example is efficiency of diesel engine. You know, the thermal efficiency of diesel engine which drives your cars and trucks is typically 30-35%. Remaining energy or remaining heat is simply rejected to the atmosphere. We cannot extract energy out of it. Now, what would be a good source of energy? The good source of energy from where you extract energy, it should be able to deliver huge or large amount of work per unit mass or volume. Means less amount of fuel or less amount of source should be able to deliver more work. Second is it should be easily accessible. Then it should be easy to store and transport. And finally, it should be economical or cost effective. So when you burn fuel, you get energy. So fuel is also a source of energy. So let us also look at some of the key things which you will be looking at if you are selecting a fuel. So how much heat does it release on burning? For example, if you are burning 1 gram of diesel or 1 gram of petrol or 1 gram of natural gas, how much energy does it release? Does it produce a lot of smoke? So smoke is nothing but unburnt carbon. Or in other words, does it produce a lot of pollutants when you are burning the fuel? Now coming to the distribution of energy sources, means which source is contributing how much towards the energy demand. So you can see from this curve, most of the energy demand is coming from fossil fuels. So 56%, this black, is coming from coal, almost 30% is coming from petroleum and other liquids, and renewable energy contributes less than 3%. So you know fossil fuels are non-renewable source of energy, and with this type of distribution, there is a high risk that we will be running out of these resources very soon. So during early days, wood was used as a fuel for heating, for burning, for cooking. Then with the exploitation of coal, industrial revolution came. We were able to run a lot of industries. Urbanization, standard of living, due to all these things, global energy demand increased. So fossil fuels became the prime source of energy. Now these are non-renewable sources, as I have already told. They take millions of years for formation through dead plants or through dead animals, but the time which they take to form is too much, and if you consume these energy sources at this speed, you will be exhausting them pretty soon. Now when you burn fossil fuels, you are also aware that it may lead to air pollution, because it leads to emission of carbon monoxide, NOx and SOx. So NOx is nothing but combination of NO2 and NO. Similarly, SOx is combination of SO2 and SO3. And these two gases, NOx and SOx, are responsible for acid rain, which may destroy our land resources and water resources. When you burn fossil fuels, you also get carbon dioxide, which is an important greenhouse gas, which is responsible for greenhouse effect. Now coming to the functioning of thermal power plant, how exactly heat energy is converted to electric energy in a thermal power plant. It's called thermal power plant because it depends on the principle of heating. So we are heating a fuel to produce steam, which in turn rotates turbine and produces electricity. So let us see the schematic here. So this is a fuel tank where you are storing either heavy oil or gas or even coal. So you burn this coal in this furnace, which is a part of this boiler. Now burning of this coal will produce a lot of heat. This heat will be used to vaporize the water. Water will convert to steam, and this steam will be used to rotate the blades of this turbine. And these blades or this turbine is connected via shaft to a electric generator, and we have already seen the functioning of electric generator. Whenever the coil will move, it will produce electricity, and this is what you can see here. This is turbine and this is generator, and then electricity is sent to through the transmission tower. Whatever waste gases, like just now we saw, there will be NOx, there will be SOx, CO, CO2, all these waste gases will be filtered here. You will also have some catalytic converters which will convert these gases into water and CO2, which are less harmful compared to other gases, and finally you will send them through stack into the atmosphere. So this is how a typical thermal power plant works. So hydro power plant will convert potential energy of water into electric energy, which is again a renewable source of energy, unlike fossil fuels. So you can see some drawbacks of creating dams, because for exploiting the potential energy of water, you need to take water to a great height and drop it from that point, so that the potential energy is converted into kinetic energy, and this kinetic energy is used to rotate the blades of turbine, which will generate electric energy. So the drawbacks are, the dams can be constructed only in a limited number of places, preferably in hilly areas. Large ecosystems are destroyed when submerged under the water in dams, because you will be storing a lot of water, you will be stopping the flow of river, and you will be storing a lot of water. This storage of water, it will submerge the nearby areas. So the vegetation which is submerged rots under anaerobic condition, because there is limited amount of oxygen, and this also leads to formation of methane gas. And again, methane is a greenhouse gas just like carbon dioxide. That is why you would have seen in past there were several opposition to a construction of Tehri Dam on river Ganga, and also Sardar Sarovar Dam project on river Narmada. So this is how a dam functions. You can imagine this is a dam, and it has stored a lot of water. It has blocked the flow of river, and once you have sufficient height, you release the water through this slit, and once the water flows from this height, you can see here the potential energy of water, which is mgh, that will be connected to the potential energy of water will be converted to the kinetic energy, and using that kinetic energy, these turbine blades will be rotated, and once these blades rotate, they are connected to the generator, and just like what was happening in thermal power plant, this generator will be used to generate electricity, and then it can be transmitted. Now coming to another important source of energy, which is biomass, which is also renewable, because the fuel which are generated from biomass are derived from plant and animal products. So you can see a schematic here. You put in slurry from here. Slurry is nothing but animal waste plus water. You put slurry from here, you have soil in the tank. So animal waste and water is the feed here. This slurry you put into the soil, and this is a dome shaped structure. The outlet gases or the biogas, this will mostly contain methane, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and hydrogen. This is a combustible gas. You can use it for cooking, for heating, and for other purposes. And this chamber is anaerobic. So this is sealed chamber. When you put all this slurry inside this, so anaerobic means in absence of oxygen, microbes will act on this slurry, and then they will decompose the compost or decompose the waste which is present here, and ultimately you will get these gases, or the combination of these gases is biogas. So this is how a biogas plant actually looks like. So this is that same dome structure what we are talking here. There will be slurry inside, and then you can collect the biogas. That biogas can be used for heating or cooking purposes. So biogas is an excellent fuel as it contains up to 75% methane. It burns without smoke, leaves no residue like ash in wood, charcoal, and during coal burning you will have ash in all these cases, but there is no residue when you burn biogas. It also burns without smoke, so it is more clean fuel compared to coal and wood. And you have already seen the biogas will have this composition. So these are the most important gases which will be present, but 75% will be methane. So the heat capacity is high. Biogas is also used for lighting. The slurry left behind, whatever slurry is left behind after you have collected the biogas, this is periodically removed and used as excellent manure, which is rich in nitrogen and phosphorus. So once you mix this content with the soil, because you know soil is also there and you are continuously pouring in slurry, after some time this will convert into compost or manure, and this can be used as fertilizers. So large-scale utilization of bio-waste and sewage material provides a safe and efficient method of waste disposal besides supplying energy and manure. So you can get rid of a lot of waste also, because ultimately this is animal and plant waste, what you are putting here, mixing it with soil, and that soil you are using as manure after some time, and you are collecting the biogas. So this is an excellent source of energy. Apart from that, this is also an excellent way of getting rid of bio-waste. Now coming to wind energy. So wind energy is an environment friendly and efficient source of renewable energy. It requires no recurring expenses for the production of electricity. But there are limitations with wind energy production. For example, output of a single windmill is small. So windmill is nothing, it's a device which will have blades in it, and the wind will be used to rotate the blades, just like what we were how we were rotating the blades of turbine in thermal and hydroelectric power plant. So when the blade of the windmill rotates, it will be connected to turbine, and this turbine will generate electricity. The wind speed should be more than 15 kmph, else below this speed there will not be any significant output coming out of windmill. You also need backup facilities like storage cells to take care of energy needs when there is no wind. So if there is no wind, the blades of windmill will not rotate and you will not be able to generate any electricity. So you need some backup facilities like storage cells where you can store power and you can use it when there is no wind. So 1 megawatt generator for 1 megawatt production of electricity from windmill, you need about 2 hectares of land. So the land requirement is also huge. The initial cost of establishment of farm is quite high because you need a lot of windmill and lot of land. Tower and blades are continuously exposed to nature like rain, sun, storm and cyclone, because these are outdoor installations and they need high level of maintenance. They are prone to corrosion, and also you need to spend more effort in maintaining the structural integrity because these are outdoor installations. You can see an example of a windmill. So these are the blades of windmill, which is nothing but a turbine, and there will be a generator inside and the current will be taken out from this generator. So this is a global scenario, list of countries and how much electricity they are producing from wind energy. So you can see China is producing almost 36% of total production through wind energy, and India is on fourth number. We are producing 37,000 megawatt, which is around 5.8% of the total world production. India is also slowly increasing its capacity for power generation using wind energy. So few years back India was on fifth spot, but now India has gained fourth spot, and aggressively India is also trying to pursue generation of electricity using wind energy. Now coming to most important form of renewable energy, which is solar energy. So you can see the energy consumption of world, how the energy consumption of entire world is increasing. So this is terawatt hour per year. This is the unit of energy consumption, and you can see from 1965 till 2015 there is a continuous increase in energy consumption. And if you rely heavily on fossil fuels, you can see the day is not far when you will be exhausting all the resources and you will have nothing to turn back to. That is why a huge emphasis or a lot of efforts are being spent to generate alternate sources of energy. You can see, in fact, the share of renewable energy has also increased, but it has not increased that much compared to that of oil and coal. So still, the prime sources of energy are coal and oil. Now, this is a chart which shows how much potential India has for solar energy. So you can see the entire area of India receives very good amount of irradiation. Irradiation is nothing, it is measured in kilowatt hour per meter square. So that is the potential of generation of solar power. So that solar power India receives. So you can see these are daily totals which are highlighted on top row, and the bottom row shows yearly totals. So most of the time throughout the year, India would stay in this 4.6 to 5 range. So India has huge potential for solar energy generation. Now coming to one application of solar energy, which is solar cooker or solar heater. You can see sun rays are coming. There is a mirror here. Using these mirror, sun rays will be reflected inside, and there will be a glass sheet which will trap the sunlight inside, and whatever food is kept inside this box, that will get heated up. And a black color coating or black colored material is used to paint inside, because black color absorbs most of the sunlight. Now the question here is, why glass sheet is used in solar cooker heater? Why do we need a glass sheet? Why can't we simply put a mirror here and reflect all the rays into this box? Because black color is anyways absorbing most of the part of sunlight, so why do we need a glass sheet here? Let us look at the ray diagram. So this is solar cooker. This is the ray of light or sunlight which is falling on the glass sheet, this glass sheet. A part of it will be reflected back. So the property of glass is it blocks high wavelength radiation. So infrared radiation, which is of high wavelength, it will block that. It will reflect that radiation, but it will allow small wavelength radiation to pass. So this small infrared radiation, small wavelength infrared radiation passes through the glass sheet. But upon striking the surface, or upon getting absorbed by the black material which is inside, or the black coating which is inside, it loses a part of energy. When it loses a part of energy, its wavelength increases. So once wavelength increases, it cannot escape this box because you have glass here. Just like high wavelength infrared radiation was reflected here, it will also get reflected at this surface, and this sunlight or this infrared rays are trapped inside this box, and this will lead to heating of the material whatever is kept inside. So I think this is clear now. High wavelength infrared rays, they are reflected. Infrared is responsible for heating, by the way. High wavelength rays are reflected. Short infrared wavelength rays are taken into the box via this glass sheet. But once it strikes the surface, or once it starts getting absorbed by the black coating which is there, it loses a part of energy. Once energy is lost, these short wavelength gets converted to high wavelength, and these high wavelength now cannot escape glass, because glass has a property of blocking high wavelength radiations. Another example for harnessing solar energy is solar cell. So you can have a solar cell which generates a voltage in presence of sunlight. A typical cell develops a voltage of 0.5 to 1 volt and can produce about 0.7 watt of electricity. Now depending on what is your requirement, you can arrange these solar cells into a solar panel. You can have multiple cells in series and parallel to generate whatever requirement. They have no moving parts, they require little maintenance and work quite satisfactorily without use of any focusing device. Unlike you saw in parabolic mirrors or solar heater, you need mirrors which reflect sunlight onto the glass sheet, and that is how the food gets heated up. But here you don't need that. They can be set up in any remote and inaccessible hamlet or very sparsely inhabited areas where it is difficult for transmission lines to go. For example, it's a hilly terrain and it is really not possible to lay down transmission lines for supply of electricity. You can very well use solar energy in that area. But what are the challenges? So special grade silicon for making solar cells is limited, although silicon is abundant in our earth, but special grade silicon which is used specifically for making solar cells, that is limited. The process of manufacture is still very expensive. Silver is used for interconnection of the cells. Means when you are connecting cells, solar cells in series or parallel, to connect two cells, you are using silver. And because of that, the solar panel further becomes expensive. And the efficiency of these solar cells are still very low. So we are at around 16 to 20% for commercially available solar cells. Although higher efficiencies have been achieved in lab, but they are not yet commercial. What are the uses of solar cells? So artificial satellites which go into space like Mars orbiters, they use solar cells as the main source of energy. Radio or wireless transmission systems, even TV relay stations in remote locations, they use solar panels for electricity requirements. Traffic signals, you might have seen calculators. So whenever the battery of calculator is down, you could keep it in sunlight for some time so that battery charges and you are able to use it again. It is also used in many toys, and also you would have seen many solar installations on domestic rooftops because many people have now started using solar as the source of electricity. At least a part of electricity is generated using solar panels, and remaining they continue taking it from the grid. Now coming to another important source of energy, but again the efficiency is too low, but nonetheless it is an alternate source of energy, which is ocean. So first one is tidal energy. This can be harnessed by constructing a dam across a narrow opening to the sea. A turbine is fixed at the opening of dam which converts the energy in the tides to electricity. So tides are caused by gravitational pull of moon. So whenever there are high tides, you can harness a lot of energy by rotating the turbine, and in case of low tides, the energy generation will be limited. So you can see here, this is a high tide and this is a narrow slit through which you will allow the water to pass, and whenever during high tide water passes from this zone to this zone, this turbine will move, and this turbine will be connected to a generator inside which will generate electricity. Now, coming to second source from ocean is wave energy. This is kinetic energy possessed by huge waves near the seashore. They can be trapped in a similar manner to generate electricity. Basically, you can again put a turbine which will exploit the kinetic energy of the waves, and when the turbine blades rotate, it will be converted into electricity. So the waves are generated by strong winds blowing across the sea. So you can see one example here. It's a shallow sea very close to shore. They have placed this installation, and whenever there are waves due to strong wind, these turbines will move. And once these turbines move, they are connected to the generator, and you can convert this wave energy into electric energy. The third one is ocean thermal energy, where you are using the heat energy from ocean. So water at surface of sea is heated by sun, but still when you go in deep, the temperature will be still cold. So if the temperature difference between the surface and the water at depth up to 2 kilometers is say 20 degrees Celsius or more, then this effect can be used. It means if surface is hotter than the depth by 20 degrees or more, you can use this ocean thermal energy. The warm surface is used to boil a volatile liquid, for example ammonia. Boiling point of ammonia is minus 32.3 degrees Celsius. So you know, even if you give water at say minus 20 degrees Celsius, it will convert ammonia into vapor. And using this vapor, you can rotate the turbine of generator. And here also the principle is same. Once the generator coil rotates, you will be able to withdraw electricity from it. The cold water from the depth is pumped up and condensed vapor again to the liquid. So once you have converted ammonia into the vapors by boiling it, then again you can use cold water which is at the depth in ocean to condense that vapor again back to liquid. You can see this here. So you have, for example, they have considered in this example water vapor. You can also consider this as ammonia. This is an evaporator where the evaporation of ammonia or water vapor will take place. Surface water is warm. You take this warm water into this evaporator. Boiling of ammonia or boiling of water will take place. You will have water vapor. This water vapor will be used to rotate the turbine, which is present here in the turbine generator assembly. You withdraw electricity, and whatever is the waste vapor or the vapor which has rotated the turbine, you use that vapor and you put it in a condenser where you have cold water coming from the depth. Now this water is cold, this is a vapor. You know the condensation will happen and this vapor will convert back to liquid. So if it is liquid ammonia, it will be sent back to evaporator, loop covers, loop closes, and if you are using water vapor, then you can simply drain it into ocean. Now coming to geothermal energy, due to geological changes, molten rocks, which are formed in the deeper hot region of Earth's crust, are pushed upward and trapped in certain region called as hotspots. Now, when underground water comes in contact with these hotspots, so this is molten metal, right? Molten rock or molten metal in these hotspots. And when underground water comes in contact with these hotspots, steam will be generated and it will be a very high pressure steam. So sometimes hot water from that region finds outlet at the surface because there might be some defects, there might be some cracks, and through these cracks, hot water or steam can come out. Such outlets are known as hot springs. The steam trapped in the rocks is routed through a pipe to a turbine. Again, same principle, you are rotating turbine blade using the hot steam which is generated when underground water comes in contact with molten rocks. So you can see one example of a geyser or hot spring here where a lot of steam is coming out of a crevice or crack in the earth. Now coming to another source of energy, which is nuclear energy. Nucleus of a heavy atom such as uranium, plutonium or thorium, when it is bombarded with low energy neutrons. So bombarded means when it is collided, when it is made to collide with the low energy neutrons, these heavy atoms, they split into lighter nucleus. Means a larger atom will split into two smaller atoms. When this is done, a tremendous amount of energy is released if the mass of original nucleus is little bit more than the sum of masses of individual products. So basically this is an example where mass is converting to energy. When we started chemical reactions and equations, we limited our discussion only to electrons. We were not focusing on nucleus because I said nucleus will get involved in a special set of reactions where we will also see change in mass. So for chemical reactions, you don't see any change in mass. Stoichiometry holds good. The sum of mass of all the reactants should be equal to sum of mass of all the products. You cannot violate law of conservation of mass there. But in nuclear reaction, some amount of mass gets converted to energy, and that is the source of nuclear energy. So there are two types of nuclear reactions. One is fission. What is written here? Fission means splitting of atoms. The another one is fusion, which we will see shortly. Fusion means combining of atoms. So the fission of an atom of uranium, for example, produces 10 million times the energy produced by combustion of an atom of carbon from coal. So you can see the scale of energy that is produced. In a nuclear reactor designed for electric power generation, this nuclear fuel can be a part of self-sustaining fission chain reaction that releases energy at a controlled rate. The energy can be used to produce steam and further generate electricity. So when mass is getting converted to energy, a lot of energy is released. This energy is nothing but heat. This heat can be used to produce steam, and you have already seen steam can be used to rotate turbine blades, which are connected to generator, and electricity will be generated. And one more important thing is mentioned here, a self-sustaining fission chain reaction. Self-sustaining means once you have started this reaction will keep on happening. You need not provide any fuel or you need not provide any catalyst from the outside once the reaction has started. Once the reaction has started, it is self-sustaining. It will continue happening till the entire fuel or till the entire uranium is consumed. We will shortly see how this chain reaction or self-sustaining reaction happens. So you can see this is a neutron. So all these white dots are nothing but neutron. So this is a uranium 236 is the mass number. This is one atom. You make it collide with one neutron. So once it collides with neutron, you can see it generates barium and krypton, and it also releases 3 neutrons. Now you already have neutron. These neutrons will collide with again uranium 236 because this is the reactant with which you started the reaction, and you have excess neutrons now. This will again collide. Similarly, it will produce more neutrons. This will again collide with uranium and it will produce more neutrons. So you can see this is a self-sustaining chain reaction. So one neutron and one atom of uranium, it started a chain of reaction, and slowly you will see it will become uncontrolled if you don't remove these neutrons. So if you have so many neutrons, the reaction might become an explosive reaction also, right? That is very important to control this reaction by absorbing these neutrons. So we will see the details how we absorb these neutrons in higher classes. But right now it is important to understand that when you bombard an atom of uranium with neutron, it forms lower molecular mass components. That is clear. It also releases more neutrons, and these neutrons can further collide with remaining uranium, giving rise to chain reaction, and this reaction keeps on continuing. This is a self-sustaining chain reaction. Why it is a fission? It is called fission because uranium is splitting into two smaller atoms. If two smaller atoms combine to form a bigger atom, then it becomes a fusion reaction. So let us see, this is a very important or very well-known equation, E is equal to delta mc square. So this is energy mass equivalence equation. This gives a relation how much energy will be released when delta mass is converted to energy. We know, or this conversion factor you should know, it is a very common unit of measuring energy, which is electron volt. So 1 electron volt is nothing but 1.6 multiplied by 10 to the power minus 19 joules. So that is the conversion factor between electron volt and joules. So if you have mega electron volt or million electron volt, million is 10 to the power 6. So 1 electron volt is 10 to the power 90 minus 19. 1 million or mega electron volt will be 10 to the power minus 13, because 1 mega electron volt is 10 to the power 6 electron volt. So how much energy is released? Let us look at this calculation. So delta M, if it is 1 atomic mass unit. So I am trying to calculate how much electron volt or how much joules of energy will be released if there is a change of 1 atomic mass unit. So you simply put in this equation, delta M is 1 AMU, atomic mass unit, and you know from your previous classes 1 AMU is nothing but 1.67 into 10 to the power minus 27 kgs. And speed of light in vacuum is also known to you, that is 2.998 into 10 to the power 8, or approximately you can say 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. Now when you do this calculation and you know how to convert joule to mega electron volt, this is the factor that you can use here. And if you do this, you will see it will come to 931 mega electron volt. It means change in mass by just 1 atomic mass unit releases 931 mega electron volts of energy, which is too much. And imagine if the change of mass continues in a chain reaction, how much energy you can expect from a nuclear reaction. Now coming to challenges with nuclear energy, storage and disposal of spent or used fuels. It is very difficult because uranium is still decaying and that reaction will keep on continuing. Although you might be able to slow down the reaction, but the radiation will never die. You will still have harmful radiations coming out of uranium. So the disposal of the used fuels, that becomes a problem. So improper nuclear waste storage and disposal can result in environmental contamination also. There is also a risk of accidental leakage of nuclear reactors. You would have seen tragedies like, or heard about tragedies like Chernobyl, where there was huge loss of life and property due to instability in one of the nuclear reactors. Now coming to another type of nuclear reaction, which is fusion. So fusion means joining lighter nucleus to make a heavier nucleus, most commonly a hydrogen or hydrogen isotope. You can see the reaction here. So this is typically hydrogen is what? Hydrogen is 1H1, means mass number is 1. But you also have deuterium, where the mass number is 2 but atomic number is still 1. So this is hydrogen isotope. So two hydrogen isotopes are combining to form one neutron and one helium molecule or helium atom. So this is the source of energy in sun and stars, nuclear fusion. The conditions needed for this process are extreme, means you need millions of degrees of temperature and millions of pascals of pressure. So this reaction, although it looks so easy, but to achieve this fusion reaction, you need a lot of pressure and lot of temperature. Hydrogen bomb is also based on thermonuclear fusion. But since you need a lot of energy for this fusion to happen, first you have to undergo a nuclear fission reaction. And the energy generated from fission reaction will be used for fusion, and that is the working principle of hydrogen bomb. First there will be a fission reaction, a controlled fission reaction which releases sufficient energy for this reaction to happen. Now we will start with another topic, which is our environment. Like I said, we'll be covering 2 chapters in this lecture. So first we'll talk about ecosystem. All organisms, such as plants, animals, microorganisms, and human beings, as well as the physical surroundings, they interact with each other to maintain a balance in nature. So it's not only living things, even the physical surroundings, they interact with each other to maintain a balance in nature. All interacting organisms in an area, along with the non-living constituents of the environment, they form a ecosystem. So abiotic and biotic components. Biotic means living and abiotic means non-living constituents. They form an ecosystem. So an ecosystem consists of biotic components comprising of living organisms and abiotic components comprising of physical factors like temperature, rainfall, wind, soil, and minerals. Combined, this forms an ecosystem. There are different trophic levels in an ecosystem. So first are the producers, then there are primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. So what are these? So green plants, certain type of bacteria which are able to make their own food, they are called autotrophs, and these are the primary producers or simply producers. Primary consumers are the herbivores which eat these plants. So small carnivores become secondary consumers which are eating these herbivores. And then finally large carnivores which are also eating herbivores plus they are eating small carnivores. So these are the different trophic levels along which the energy passes in an ecosystem, and these all form parts of ecosystem. So these are nothing but biotic components of ecosystem. So producers are the plants and bacteria which make their own food. Primary consumers are herbivores because they are eating producers directly, and the small carnivores which are eating herbivores are secondary consumers, and finally there are tertiary consumers which are large carnivores which will eat carnivores also and they will eat herbivores also. Yeah, so consumers can be classed variously as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and parasites, and these are called as producers. So even parasites, they depend on other living animals for their food. They also come into the category of consumers. Now let us see how energy passes from one step to another. So this is an industrial example. This is not related to the chapter of our environment, but this is an industrial example. So this is the prime source of energy. For example, coal, crude oil, solar energy. So you will be extracting energy, and this is the prime source of energy because it has a lot of energy. Now this energy, when you convert crude oil to petrol, diesel, you will have some losses, right? And then you will convert maybe crude oil to petrol, diesel, and electricity. So there is a loss, and some amount of energy will be passed on to the next level. Then again, you have to transmit this energy. You have produced electricity, but how will the consumers or the industry receive that electricity? You have to transmit that. Again, in transmission, there will be some loss, and you will further reduce the amount of energy. This is the final energy, which is the energy received by consumers like industry and commerce. Now, what you will do as a consumer is you will use that energy for cooling, for mobility, for lighting appliances, for heating food, or whatnot. You would have n number of applications for this. So when you are converting, then again there will be some loss, and you will be left with only useful energy. So you see, when transition from primary energy to useful energy happens, there are losses at each step, and these losses are not less, these are significant losses. So in this conversion, you will lose a lot of energy. In transmission, you will lose a lot of energy. And then final energy conversion to useful energy, just like lighting a bulb, you will be losing a lot of energy. So at each energy level, you will be losing a lot of energy. Same thing holds good for trophic levels in environment. So plants will make their food from sunlight in presence of chlorophyll. This is known, but they will be able to convert only 1% of sun's total energy in making food, and remaining will be rejected as heat or it will be wasted. So this is what will happen with producers. Now, when consumers or herbivores, they eat producers, only 10% of the energy will be transmitted to consumers. Remaining will be lost either in digestive process or it will be wasted. So at each level, you can roughly say only 10% of the energy of previous level will be transmitted and remaining will be wasted as heat. Same thing is applicable for decomposers. So after consumers, primary consumers, secondary consumer and tertiary consumers, only 10% of what is remaining of any of these consumer will be passed on to the decomposers and remaining will be lost as heat. Now decomposers will not transfer back energy, they will return back the nutrients into the inorganic nutrient pool. For example, nitrates or sulfates, whatever decomposer, convert that into. So it is very clear that little energy is available for next level of consumers. So most of the energy of the producer will be available to herbivores, but the first level or small carnivore will have lesser energy which is available to them, and secondary carnivores, they will have even lesser energy. So at each level, energy keeps on reducing. The loss of energy at each step is so great that little usable energy remains after 4 trophic levels. So that is why the last diagram that we saw, where producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers and tertiary consumers, the energy gets exhausted as tertiary consumers. The energy after that is so negligible, we don't talk about the 5th trophic level, we only talk about 4 trophic levels. Now coming to another important concept, which is food web, because each organism is generally eaten by 2 or more other kinds of organisms, which in turn are eaten by several other organisms. So you cannot have a straight chain, you will in fact have a web going in vertical direction, also going in horizontal direction, because one organism can be eaten by more than 2 species. So instead of a straight line food chain, the relationship can be shown as a series of branching lines, and these branching lines, this entire network is called food web. So you can see here, this is the food web. Just to pick some example, snake is also consuming frog, it's also consuming a bird, it is also consuming a rat. So you can see a web is getting formed, but peacock and hawk or eagle, they can also consume the snake. And similarly, tiger, it can consume bird, it can also directly consume herbivore, which is directly eating grass. So you see, this is a web sort of structure. You cannot have a straight chain, there will be cross links. Another very important concept is biological magnification. So let me explain it by some examples, what exactly magnification means. So biological magnification means getting a pollutant into our food chain and then magnification of that pollutant. That is the simple definition of biological magnification. For example, there is a pollutant X. As the trophic level increase from producer till tertiary consumer, as the trophic level increase, the amount of toxic or an amount of toxin that has entered at producer level, that will also increase or that will magnify, which is nothing but biological magnification. So if you look here, suppose this is one atom of fertilizer that was put in growing wheat. So you have put fertilizers while growing wheat and assume there are only 5 plus symbols. So each plus symbol is one atom of fertilizer. Now when the wheat is produced and this rat, it starts eating that wheat, because it will not eat a limited amount of wheat, right? It will eat a lot of wheat. So these pluses will increase. And over the life, this snake will not eat one rat, it will eat multiple rats. So you will see that the pluses further increase. These pluses are nothing but the toxic compound which was in the fertilizer here. And then finally, when this bird eats this snake, and this bird will also eat multiple snakes over its life, you can see the concentration of toxin keeps on increasing. Here you have 5 pluses, here you have more, here further more, and here you cannot even count the number of pluses. So this is how the magnification of pollutant or magnification of toxin is happening as we move from lower trophic level to higher trophic level. This is called biological magnification. Let us look at another example. So this is algae, which is found in seawater, also in rivers. This is eaten by zooplanktons, which are the creatures which are found in water bodies. And this ppm, it represents the amount of toxin which is present. For example, algae has 0.04 ppm. ppm is parts per million, or simply you can call it as concentration. So 0.04 ppm, which is negligible, which is very less. But when zooplankton starts eating this algae, it will consume algae in large amount, right? It will not even not eat one particle of algae. Over the life, it will eat lot of algae. So the concentration becomes from 0.04 to 0.23. Then small fish will eat this zooplankton and the concentration becomes around 2 ppm. And this small fish will be eaten by large fish and not just one fish, multiple fishes. Concentration increases by almost 7.36 ppm. And then humans will eat these large fishes. So you can see the toxicity that has reached humans has become 13.55 ppm. So it started with 0.04 ppm and it became 13.55 ppm. So this increase in concentration of toxin or pollutant is magnification or biological magnification. Now let us talk about adverse effects of our activities on environment. What are we doing and how are we causing harm to our environment? So first one is ozone layer depletion. This is a topic which is very common nowadays. So if you turn on any news and some information about climate convention or climate change is going on, so ozone layer is the first topic that comes into discussion. So on higher levels in atmosphere, how exactly is ozone formed? Let us look at that. So ultraviolet radiation is coming from sun. Oxygen in presence of these ultraviolet radiation will break down into two nascent oxygen or two oxygen atoms. Now these oxygen atoms will react with another oxygen to form ozone. So ozone is O3. This ozone is responsible for shielding us against UV rays from sun. So these UV rays which are coming from sun, it is very harmful and it is responsible for causing diseases like skin cancer in human beings. So this ozone is acting as a protective sheet and it doesn't allow UV rays to pass through the atmosphere. Other rays it will allow to pass. So it is our shield against UV rays. Now, due to excessive use of certain compounds, for example, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, which is used in refrigerations, this ozone layer is getting depleted. What is CFC? CFC, like I said, is chlorofluorocarbon. So these are compound of chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. So CFCl3 or CF2Cl2, all these are chlorofluorocarbons. So CFCl3, this is used in refrigeration, in your air conditioner, in your refrigerators. In presence of UV radiation, it forms CFCl2 because this is present in our atmosphere. Now, in presence of UV radiation, that it forms a free chlorine atom. Similarly, CF2Cl2, which is another chlorofluorocarbon, in presence of UV, it forms CF2Cl and releases another chlorine atom. Now, this chlorine atom is responsible for ozone layer depletion or hole in ozone layer. So, this chlorine will react with ozone and it will form oxygen. So, that ozone, this much amount of 1 mole of ozone is gone now from the layer, and if this process continues, you will have a what is called as hole in ozone. So if you combine these reactions, so overall reaction is 2 mole of ozone forming 3 moles of oxygen. And why ozone is reacting, or with which constituent ozone is reacting? It is reacting with free chlorine atom, which is generated by chlorofluorocarbon. So you can see applications and replacement of CFCs. Now CFCs are banned. So if you purchase a new refrigerator or new air conditioner, you will see on the label that it is eco-friendly, it is eco-green, and they will claim that they are not using any CFC, they are using newer or advanced refrigerants. So you can see application of chlorofluorocarbons. It was used in refrigeration and air conditioning. CCl2, F2, and so on. You can see so many compounds. Propellants and medicinal aerosols. So in sprays, also CFCs was used. So blowing agent for foams, solvents, degreasing agents, and cleaning agents. So all these applications, chlorofluorocarbons were used. And that was the reason why so much CFC concentration increased in our atmosphere. And due to this reaction, ozone layer started depleting because the chlorine atom which is generated by presence of this gas is responsible for eating up ozone. There are also replacements here. What are the new refrigerants that we are using? For example, this is a hydrofluorocarbon. So chlorofluorocarbon has become a hydrofluorocarbon. This is a very common refrigerant, R134A. This you would have seen in compressors of AC. So name of this compound written on compressors of new generation AC 134A or 143A, which is the newer refrigerants which are used. Now also highlighting some issues regarding the waste that we produce. So you can see top 5 municipal solid waste generators annually. So these are the world's top 5 and India tops this list. So you can see in 2016, the estimate was 277 million tons of solid waste annually, and it is projected to increase to 543 million tons. So you can see it is a severe problem now. Other countries, due to strict or due to better waste disposal techniques, they are able to control it. You see the rise, for example, in solid waste production for US from 263, it is estimated only till 359. But for us, it is almost doubling because it's a severe problem in India and we are still not paying much attention on solid waste management. So now coming to composition of waste in South Asia, you can see 57% is almost food and greens, 7% is metal plus glass combined, 8% is plastic, 2% is rubber and leather, and 15% source or the type of waste is unknown. So you can see we have mixed variety of sources of waste, and all these are dumped into the ground. So the challenge here is how to segregate it and what to dump and what not to. We should be very careful in disposing certain compounds or certain materials, for example, plastic, metal, and glass, because these are not so easily decomposed. So they will remain in soil for a long time and they might lead to problems of toxicity also. So we will see what are different types of wastes. So first is biodegradable, which can be decomposed by bacteria or microbes, and abiotic elements like temperature, oxygen, and ultraviolet rays. Plant waste, animal waste, fruits, vegetable, cardboard, paper, everything comes under the category of biodegradable. Second category is non-biodegradable, which cannot be decomposed by natural organisms. For example, metals, plastics, glass, chemicals, batteries, polybags. And if you remember the last diagram what I showed you, this other is nothing but most of this will be chemicals, batteries, and other compounds which are not biodegradable. So these wastes you should not directly dump into the soil, or you should properly segregate them, and a proper waste disposal mechanism should be followed for disposing of these wastes, because they cannot be directly thrown into a normal dustbin. Now with this we come to an end of this chapter. In fact, we have covered 2 chapters in this lecture. In the next lecture we'll be starting with mathematics. We have already covered physics and chemistry basic concepts for our JEE or advanced foundation course. In the next chapter or in the next lecture, we will be talking about real numbers. So if you have liked this video, please give us a thumbs up. Also subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on any important update. Till then, thank you.